All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the November meeting of the Arlington County Planning Commission. This is our first of two meetings this month. Tonight on our agenda, we'll be hearing some general land use plan, master transportation plan, certificate of development rights, and also some rezoning amendments, all regarding some changes for Jenny Dean Park expansion. And we're also going to be hearing some zoning amendments as well with regard to bonus density. And then on Wednesday of this week, we'll be hearing all the items for the Harris Teeter site plan. So if you're here for Harris Teeter, please come back on Wednesday. Anybody wishing to testify anything before us this evening, please have your speaker slip turned into our clerk, Ms. Johnson, before the item is called. Always a reminder to folks to keep their cell phones off the dais and away from the table, as it does interfere with microphones as well. So with that, Madam Clerk, can you please call the first item?
Our first item this evening is on Jenny Dean Park. 1A is GP-348-19-1, the General Land Use Plan Amendment. 1B, Z-2610-19-1, rezoning. 1C, Master Transportation Plan Amendment. And 1D, Certification of Transferable of Development Rights. We have Kim Vaga, our planning staff, to present this item this evening.
Welcome, Ms. Vaca. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'd also like to note the vacation as well, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think that's 1E, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
Ms. Vaca, for that
Also with
clarification.
me this evening are staff from DPR and as well from DES Transportation and Real Estate to answer any questions that the Planning Commission may have. So to begin, there are 5 applications before you tonight for discussion. The first is a general land use plan amendment. The second is a master transportation plan amendment. The third is a public street vacation. The fourth is a certification of transferable development rights. And the fifth is a rezoning. And I will walk you through each application. For some context and background, the site of all these applications is Jenny Dean Park, which is located in South Arlington along South 4 Mile Run Drive near I-395. The park was originally designed in 1949 and includes both active and passive park uses, including a basketball court, tennis courts, restroom facilities, athletic fields for baseball and softball, a playground, picnic grill and area, and a small casual space. In September of last year, in 2018, the County Board approved the 4 Mile Run Valley Area Plan and Park Master Plan, which includes Jenny Dean Park, Shirlington Park, and Shirlington Dog Park. The development of the plan involved extensive community engagement with approximately 65 community meetings. And the vision for Jenny Dean Park, in summary, is to expand the park boundaries up to South 4 Mile Run Drive and improve the park amenities on the site. The park management or park master plan also noted the need for future GLUP amendments and rezonings to implement the vision and the plans. So for the first application, it's the GLUP amendment to change the land use designation for an approximate 2-acre site from service industry to public, and to add a general location for open space triangle on near 3 privately owned properties that are currently have a service land use designation as well. The intent of the general location for open space triangle is to show that the county will eventually change that land use designation to a public designation in order to, if and when the county acquires those properties for Jenny Dean Park. The amendment has been evaluated for consistency with the Public Spaces Master Plan and both the 4 Mile Run Valley Area Plan and Park Master Plan, and is consistent with all adopted policies and plans. The second application before you tonight is a master transportation plan amendment to remove 27th Street South, which is a local minor street, from South Nelson Street to the western boundary line of the WIDA property. You'll note that staff's recommendation has changed from when we brought this towards you at LRPC in September. And based on that discussion this evening and further deliberation, we have modified our recommendation to the diagram on the slide in front of you this evening. Paired with the MTP amendment is also a vacation of the public street as well to partially vacate 27th Street South, also from South Nelson Street up to the Weta parcel. And the purpose of this vacation is to implement the vision of the park master plan, which is to use this space for the park elements and help expand the boundary of the park up to South 4 Mile Run Drive. Additionally, with the vacation of the public street, it also should be noted that a condition includes an emergency vehicle turnaround easement on just east of the public street vacation to facilitate emergency service to the properties east of the vacated street, since you'll no longer be able to drive through the public street. The fourth application is a certification of transferable development rights. For some context, back in 2008, the county adopted our TDR policy, which allows a property owner to restrict the development rights of their property, which is a sending site, and transfer those rights to another location, which we call a receiving site. This can only happen for the purposes of open space, historic preservation, affordable housing, community recreation, and/or community facilities. In 2006, the county adopted the TDR ordinance to implement the TDR policy, and this is found in section 15.57B of the Arlington County zoning ordinance. Based on the square footage of the parcels under consideration, the county is requesting to certify up to 206,046 square feet of gross floor area at the site. How we calculated that acreage is the 6 parcels under consideration and the vacated street that is zoned M1. So the northern portion of the vacated street from the northern boundary of the street to the street center line. We took that acreage, which is 137,364 square feet, and times it, multiplied it by the maximum densities allowed under that zoning district, which is the M1 zoning district. The maximum FAR is 1.5, so we multiplied the square footage by 1.5 to equal 206,046 square feet of development rights. And you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide where those sites are located in reference to Jenny Dean Park. And the fifth application before you this evening is to rezone 7 parcels totaling approximately 14.5 acres from the M1 Light Industrial District and the S3A District to the PS Public Service District. The PS zoning district allows parks, playgrounds, and playfields, and will be able to implement the vision of the 4 Mile Run Valley Park Master Plan. And while the proposed GLUP designation for the site is public land use designation and is typically implemented by the SD and the S3A zoning districts, staff is recommending the PS zoning district because it allows greater height flexibility than the S3A district in order to construct the proposed athletic field lights at Jenny Dean Park. So if you can see in the diagram in the bottom left of the slide, the S3A zoning district only allows heights up to 45 feet by right and by special exception, and in some cases 68 feet. However, those heights are much less than the heights allowed by the PS zoning district, which are 75 feet in some certain circumstances and 98 feet in others. So the PS zoning district will be able to better implement the vision for Jenny Dean Park. For the community engagement piece of these applications, it began really with the 4 Mile Run Valley Park Master Plan. That process involved approximately 65 community meetings, which included the 4 Mile Run Valley Working Group meetings and subcommittee meetings, County Board work session and hearings, County Advisory Board and Commission meetings, open houses and online engagement. And that process led to where we are today, which is why we're bringing forth these applications to the Planning Commission and the County Board for consideration. For these applications specifically, staff engaged with the Transportation Commission, LRPC, the subcommittee of this commission. We also have a summary of the project and the timeline on DPR's website, and we've been sending out email blasts to stakeholders and interested members of the public. So in sum, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the County Board to adopt the proposed GLUP amendment, MTP amendment, public street vacation, certification of TDR, and rezoning. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Vaca. Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers?
We have one speaker, John Spilsbury.
Mr. Spelsbury? Okay.
No? Okay.
Are there any commissions here this evening on this matter? All right, the matter is then before the commission. I'd now like to turn to Commissioner Giacomini for an LRPC, Transportation Commission. Yes, Commissioner Lantelmi.
This matter was before the Transportation Commission at its last meeting on October 30th. The only part of this matter that was before the Transportation Commission was the change to the MTP and the vacation. After the presentation by staff, some comments, a little bit of questions, there was actually no real discussion on this, and the vote was 11-0 to recommend.
Thank you, Commissioner Lantelmi, and apologies for omitting the Transportation Commission's presentation and report. Commissioner Giacomini, LRPC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The LRPC met on this matter in September, on September 17th. And at that time, we discussed each of the requests in turn. You all had received a copy of my LRPC report, so I won't go through it word by word. But just to hit the general topics of, first, amending the general land use plan from service commercial to public. The LRPC was supportive of changing the GLUP to public, as this designation does make clear the use of land as a park. We were also very supportive, of course, of putting on the triangle to denote future open space, future park. However, we did note that the zoning request is PS, which is not associated with this particular GLUP category, so that there is a little bit of a disconnect that we were creating. And we can talk more about that under the zoning. We also discussed amending the master transportation plan to remove, at that time, it was all of that portion of, all of the 27th Street South between South Nelson Street and Shirlington Road. We raised some questions about how that might affect the still in use WIDA parcel and some of the other parcels there, because I think, as we know in our county zoning ordinance, in order to be a buildable lot, you have to have access to public right-of-way. And the MTP is part of our definition of what is public right-of-way. So if something is not in, if a street isn't in there, it's not a street, it's not public, it's not a public right-of-way. And that might have made WIDA and the other businesses non-conforming, which would then cause them issues later. Since the staff was asking to vacate only a portion of South 27th now, it would match up. The future vacation and a future removal from MTP would match. So there wasn't anything that would inhibit any kind of work that would be done to implement the park vision right now. As you can see in the staff report, they did subsequently make the vacation and the MTP request match up. Again, talking about the vacation of a portion of South 27th, that is consistent with the plan for here and would not cause any issues to any of the other owners. The certification of the transferable development rights was an interesting discussion. One of the things that came out from it is that our policy generally states that in order to be certified as a sending site, there must be a certified receiving site. And that is what we usually ask of our private developers, private landowners. Staff has pointed out in the report that we have certified density from public parks before, for instance, Mosaic, without having a sending site. Of course, we also went through this with Longbridge Park, although we did soon after have a receiving site in Penn Place. It is treating the public ownership differently than we treat private ownership. And there has been long discussed that our TDR policy needs to be amended in order to do what we might call banking of TDRs, which is something that is common in other jurisdictions across the country that have a TDR policy, something that will probably be on the staff's work plan and isn't there now. But it was just something to flag. I think staff mentioned that we did certify a sending site in a private ownership of Courthouse Manor and Wakefield Manor, right over here, the garden apartments. That was a little more of a complicated situation because at the time that certification was done, a new 12-story building was approved for the parking lot area of that site, which would have used some of the density from the garden apartment. So you would have had a little bit used and then some left over. So because the preservation of those apartments was so important, we went ahead and certified all of it. That density was later sold to the site the old Wendy's site that's out here. So anyway, something to note for the future that we might need to work on TDR policy as we see work plans come before us for coming years. Also, the request to rezone from S3A and M1 to PS Public District, we did note that actually S3A is the better zoning. PS can allow and signal more intensive use. Certainly not the plan for this park. Once there is an adopted master plan, it goes with this land. I don't think there would be any ambiguity. But again, it has been on staff's work plan, as noted in the report, that we look at S3A to talk about what we could allow by use permit, like changes in height, different things that are permitted in setbacks. This particularly has to do when we look at schools and some other community facilities. I think as JFAC moves forward with looking at different community facilities, we're going to find that we really do need to start looking at the S3A, as it is a more expression of what we want as a park rather than PS, but it does have some serious limitations for implementations of parks. So that is my report, and I am ready whenever the time comes to answer any questions and to make motions.
Thank you, Commissioner Giacomini. So I'd like to follow Commissioner Giacomini's report and outline, walk through the various items before us. So first, would like to entertain any questions on the GLUP amendments, and then go to rezoning, the MTP, the certification of the transferable development rights, and then the vacation. So any questions on the GLUP amendments? All right, moving on to rezoning. Any rezoning questions? Commissioner Gearin.
It's not a question so much as raising the issue of how can we support going forward, making the changes in the zoning ordinance so that we can start using S3A the way we intended. Certainly, the technological advances, as Commissioner Giacomini points out, mean that with the tall poles, we can direct the lighting. But since that's not permitted under S3A, I guess I'd like to go on record, and hopefully my colleagues will support me, in supporting whatever it is that we need to do so staff can make this a priority to make those changes.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like the record to show that our Director of Planning and Director of Comprehensive Planning are sitting back there nodding in the affirmative, that they've made a note in their little notebooks as we look at our work plan, particularly for the remainder of 2019, 2020, and hopefully 2020, 2021, that we will be able to work with this.
And I think the staff report does indicate some willingness to work on that. So that's good to know that our staff is doing that. And some of the newer planning commissioners may not know, there were some potential revisions to S3A a few years ago, and the kind of wider study to deal with this very issue was put aside to deal with some more minor amendments to help what is now Fleet Elementary School move forward, and also I think Stratford as well. So with that, Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. A question for staff. Would anything in the M1 district would we preclude ourselves from building the park if we left it as M1?
No, it would not. You would be able to apply for a use permit to construct a public park.
And is there any baseball field or diamond or rectangle field placed on a PS zoning district?
Yes, Longbridge Park.
All right, any other questions on the rezonings? All right, moving on to the MTP amendments. Commissioner Gearin?
Thank you. Because we've seen this change on the street issue, I think this is for our park staff. How does requiring the turnaround impact the plan for the park, if at all?
Jeremy Smith with Department of Parks and Recreation. The short answer is it doesn't affect our plan. We've been planning on we knew we need this turnaround either way.
Okay.
Just because this was a conversation we had with the fire marshal in order to get adequate access and the backup and the turnaround to those buildings.
So all those things that we had to fit back into space, this isn't going to mess up that careful design.
No, we've worked around that. So.
Thanks, Mr. Smith.
Others on this? I just want to ask staff, maybe Ms. Vaca, you mentioned that there was, some email outreach to stakeholders, and that there was also noticed in the mentioned in the staff report that flyers were posted in the general area. What specific outreach was done to the property owners or the businesses that are right along this street, the 27th Street?
We mailed public notices to property owners. I wish I had a map of our actual public notice, but many of the property owners along South 4 Mile Run Drive, north of the site, west of the site, south of the site in Shirlington, and also even the properties in Alexandria east of the site. We can supply that noticing radius to the Planning Commission if desired, but we did mail notices to those property owners.
No, that's sufficient. And I'm just wondering, have you gotten any responses from any of those property owners?
I received one phone call from a resident somewhere along South Monroe Street who was just curious what the application was. When I explained what the applications were and the intent and ultimate vision, she had a positive reaction and said that she might show up to the county board hearing in support of the project.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on this? All right, moving on to the certification of the transferable development rights. Any questions on this matter? Commissioner Yakamini.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I don't have a question. I do for staff. We do have before us a letter from the Green Valley Civic Association, and since they did not have a speaker here this evening, I just wanted to bring into the record that their request is that there be a motion made that any and all funds collected from a transfer of density be allocated specifically for the Green Valley community, and that the allocation of such funds should be made in consultation with the Green Valley Civic Association for projects of benefit to its residents. So I wondered if staff wanted to comment about what we have done with funds that we have gotten from other TDRs that we have done on public land.
So your specific question is funds from other TDRs. For Mosaic Park, the funding we received from the Founders Square development went back to Mosaic Park in the sum of a little bit over $6.6 million for the development of that space. For Penn Place, the transfer went back to Longbridge Park, where the density originated. Mosaic Park, there was another outstanding space that we acquired that now is, it's certified, but it has not yet, we have not yet identified somebody that has been interested in purchasing that. So through the board's action, the density remains certified. And once we identify a party that is interested in moving forward, there will be a process, most likely a site plan process, where we discuss how those funds are used.
So it is, we don't have a policy that would say in general that monies realized from public parkland would, if sold, go towards the parks budget so that it could be used for that land? No, does it go into the general fund?
So it doesn't, so to answer the first, the direct question, it does not go into either fund. The board action itself pretty much codifies that that density is certified, that square footage, the gross floor area is certified. And there is no provision within the county ordinance that would allow it to be earmarked into a certain geographical area?
Actually, was hoping for a slightly different answer so that we could know that if we have money that goes to parks and the park isn't right ready to use it, that should it come off of a park and later we find a receiving site and there are funds realized, those funds might go to public park improvements, at least someplace.
That's entirely correct. So to answer that question, within the proclamation that's in the board report, and I can pull that up real quickly, I think it's number 4, there is language in here that states, thank you so much, that states, blah, 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 blah. Okay, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, it's number 5, that these funds would indeed be used for the development of open space, community recreation, and community recreation facilities. Let's see, open space and the development of community recreation and/or community facilities. So we can also, this is draft language, and we could also make that language a little more specific to ensure that this goes to parks and park facilities.
I think, thank you very much for reading that into the public record, and I'm satisfied that what we would do. I completely understand the hope that the money, when we take it from a park, gets to go back, just as it did with Mosaic and Longbridge, but that sometimes there's a lag time. As long as the improvements indeed go to public parks, I think that that's a good thing. So thank you.
I just have a basic question. When the density is certified by the board, does that certification only mean that the amount of density to be transferred, it has been delivered to the public record, has been stated by the board? Or does the certification involve collecting the money for that amount of density?
It does not involve collecting the money. It merely, or I shouldn't say merely because it is significant. What it does is it designates, it states that gross floor, that square footage that translates into gross floor area cannot be used for development at that parcel, and it is on the public record that it is available to a willing partner or buyer, and may be used for development of park space and park facilities.
So one other question, follow-up.
Yes.
So at what point is money collected from?
It has to be sold to a private developer, and then it is assessed at that point.
That's right. So essentially, it's collected. So an ensuing board action would be part of either a site plan or form-based code development. And after board adoption, so the transfer of development rights would go through a process. And upon board adoption, the developer, I'm very close to Mosaic Park, and I can tell you that the developer would just technically send the money through a check to the county, which would then go into the appropriate account for park development.
That's good.
Okay. Commissioner McSweeney.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on the request from the Green Valley Civic Association with a question about the other park that's under construction in Green Valley. It's in the town square area. There's public art going there as well. And just trying to get to maybe what some of the concern is that fully funded, that project?
I am going to have to get back with you on that. Oh, thank you. Just got some real-time information that, yes, it is, Jeremy Smith just provided us with the information. It is 100% funded and under construction.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Any further questions on this? Yes, Commissioner Morton.
Just a quick question. I heard mentioned that the study of the TDR bank is in the staff work plan, but I think I didn't see that written down somewhere. Is that something that you're anticipating?
Mr. Duffy?
Okay.
Commissioner, thank you for the question. The S3A zoning work that the chair mentioned is definitely part of our work program. We're starting that this year to go into 2020. We have discussed this idea of should the county provide provisions for banking, valuing, and I'll use the word brokering, playing a more active role with TDRs than the passive role we play today. We've been successful through the policy that the county board has adopted and the standards or regulations that are both in the ordinance and as part of the Columbia Pike neighborhood plan. So we are going to consider that as we prepare for the FY21 budget. So,
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Yes, Commissioner Siegel.
I just want to know, is it the case that banking such funds needs to be consistent with state regulation? I had heard something like that at a meeting of the Crystal City Review Council, and I'd just like a little more information on that.
Commissioner Siegel, it's a very good question because there is enabling legislation for the entire Commonwealth, and we actually have in Arlington our own enabling legislation as well. So if we look at the concept of banking further, it would probably be a good idea for the county to also look at the enabling legislation as well again. And I think we've had some discussion with the county attorney about that process. So more to come on that as we get back to you with our work program for 21.
Thanks.
Yes. Since the banking issue is not before us this evening, as long as it's not on TDR banks, I'll entertain a question because what Mr. Duffy's talking about is not before us this evening. So, Commissioner Steinberger.
I don't think, oh, wow. I don't think my comment is specifically related to banking, but if you feel it veers too closely to that, I will retract, but I will have already made the comment, so apologies in advance. It seems to me that sort of in the global sense, we're addressing a very similar concept to what we dealt with last month with regards to the Verizon project in terms of where we're going to be directing resources that come from a community. And so what the Green Valley saying is what they're asking for seems to be that the TDRs from the site would be used in their community. And this is, again, something that we dealt with, I think, kind of in a sense in terms of what we looked at with Verizon, where the teardrop parcel, where the money from that would go back into being used to redevelop the park on that site. I just think that maybe we're starting to see a topic that we're going to consistently be coming up, and whether it's a floodgate or not, I think we do need to have a more consistent plan going forward in terms of how the county is going to be addressing that. And I don't think that it is, I'm going to rephrase that. I think it is unlikely that the question of resources coming from a community and where the community is going to bear the burden of and the benefit of a development, as it were, in terms of the resources that are there, wanting to see those resources used within that community, whether it's from the sale of something like TDRs or whether it's from the sale of, as in the case with Verizon, of the teardrop parcel, the sale of public lands there to have that as the redevelopment in their own community. I think we need to be prepared for those conversations and be having those conversations in a structured and organized manner, because I see a direct line from the conversation we had last month to the conversation we're sort of dancing with this month.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ware, and then Commissioner Hughes.
Yeah, I'll just associate myself with those comments and go one step further and say that we have to be prepared to basically act in the affirmative and recommend this in every case, or tell communities in every case that, no, this is not a game that we're involved in. Those decisions are made at a global level. And we have to pick one or the other. We can't be doing this ad hoc, or else we are the systemic racism that's going to disparately affect the communities as they request.
Commissioner Hughes.
The concern I have with the transfer development rights with this particular proposal is we don't know the receiving site. And that fundamentally gets into the trade-off between who benefits and who wins and where things go from there. So without knowing where the sending site is and what is the trade-off the community faces, and without the need for M1 designation to be removed, I see no reason to either remove the M1 designation to create the need to certify the development rights, or to move forward with either of the two adoptions. So I don't intend to support the transfer development rights absent a receiving site.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Any other discussion on this matter? Okay. Now, next up is the vacation. Mr. Duffy or Mr. Schreiber, our agenda for the notice for this meeting did not include the vacation. Is it appropriate for us to act on the vacation this evening?
Let me interject if you don't mind.
Sure, yes, Ms.
That revision came after the agenda was printed and posted in the legal ad. It is on the website, so it has been advertised, and the report is on the web, so
Perfect.
we can discuss it.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for that clarification. Okay, any questions on the vacation of 27th, the portion of 27th Street? Okay, so now I'd like to entertain motions. Commissioner Giacomini.
Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and do them serially since we have them listed separately. I move the Planning Commission recommend the County Board amend the general land use plan to change the land use designation from service industry to public for the parcels shown on attachment 1 of the draft staff report dated October 24th, 2019, and add a general location for open space triangle as shown on the same attachment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Hughes. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. Appears to be unanimous. Commissioner Giacomini.
I move the Planning Commission recommend the County Board amend the Master Transportation Plan to remove a portion of 27th Street South between South Nelson Street and the point where the west boundary line of the Weta property and the southern edge of 27th Street South intersect.
Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Commissioner Lantelmi. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All in favor? Again, unanimous. Commissioner Giacomini.
I move the Planning Commission recommend the County Board rezone 7 parcels as depicted on the attachment to the draft staff report concerning Jenny Dean Park dated October 24th, 2019 from M1 to S3A to PS.
Is there a second? Fails for?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Gearin. Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Oh, sorry, Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll. Part of the reason staff is moving forward with PS designation is its choice to avoid the uncomfortable conversation about what is proper within the S23A characterization. As we know, nothing about that precluded schools from building lights above the legal defined limitations of the S3A's location at the Wakefield High School. It was previously in our recorded testimony. And so given that our choice here tonight is to rezone it to PS, which is the sewage treatment plant, the industrial trade center yard, and Longbridge Park, in addition to the fire station at Arlington, I'm uncomfortable with its designation and its use. M1, as staff said, doesn't preclude its usage or the creation of the park master plan. And so for me, I would prefer to see S3A corrected and adjusted to apply the same across our community than to try to find sneaky ways to feel compliant for a zoning ordinance we know is being ignored other places in the county.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
I too am not comfortable with using PS for what really should be S3A. However, I am going to be voting in favor of this under the assurances that the zoning ordinance will in fact be worked on, and we will be correcting this ongoing. My hope and expectation is it's the last time we will have to have a rezoning of this nature, and that we will be able to be using what should be the most appropriate zoning district for these type of uses going forward.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay. Then the question comes on the motion by Commissioner Iacomini. All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Do you have that? Yes. Okay. The motion passes. Commissioner Iacomini.
I would move that the Planning Commission find that the vacation of a portion of 27th Street South from South Nelson Street to the west boundary line of the property owned by WIDA is substantially in accord with the adopted comprehensive plan or applicable portion thereof of Arlington County, Virginia.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. Any discussion? All right. All in favor? Commissioner Iacomini?
Oh, sorry.
All right. Appears to be unanimous. All right. Commissioner Iacomini?
I did forget one, didn't I?
Yes, the TDR, the transferability of density rights.
I move the Planning Commission recommend the County Board certify transferable development rights for the purpose of preserving open space on county-owned parcels totaling an area of 133,550 square feet and the former right-of-way for 27th Street South from the street center line to the northern edge of the right-of-way totaling an area of approximately 3,814 square feet with a combined total area of 137,364 square feet.
I'll second. It's a vacation, so it's a finding.
No.
We
We're
did
doing
the
transfer of
vacation.
development rights.
We're doing TDR.
So
Commissioner Iacomini, in the staff report, I think the total was 206,046 square feet.
I'm sorry, I was reading off the front of the report.
Okay. I asked
And
unanimous.
I didn't add the two numbers together, but the
Okay.
two numbers are there.
Yeah. Commissioner, I asked unanimous consent to have it reflect the total of 206,046 square feet.
It's fine. It's not, the two numbers don't add up to that
Okay.
we actually have in the front of the staff report.
The number on the staff report reflects the area of the site, not the total density to be transferred.
So you could
Okay.
do the math, but
Okay, never mind. Then retract my unanimous consent request.
I
Okay.
second.
Is there any discussion on the TDR? Yes, Commissioner Steinberger.
If this motion failed to pass, could TDRs be determined at a later point in time? Once an entity to receive the TDRs has been identified? Should I have asked that question earlier? Apologies.
Commissioner Schroll, or
Staff,
Chairman
I can
Schroll,
answer.
if staff could answer it.
Staff can answer this question.
You want to go ahead?
So the reason that the TDR is a part of this package and the rezoning together is that if we rezone at this time, the development rights of the site would go away because it would be rezoned to the PS zoning district. So if you did not want the TDR to occur at this time, but at a later time, you would not be able to approve the rezoning for the site.
Yeah. Commissioner McSweeney.
So I would like to amend this motion.
Okay.
I'd like to just add a statement that says, and the Planning Commission, and I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the County Board designate any and all funds collected from a transfer of density to be allocated specifically to improvements to realize the 4-mile run area plan. And I can explain why.
Well, it needs a second first. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. You'll have to decide who got it. All right, Commissioner Patel. Okay, Commissioner McSweeney, you can now explain your amendment.
So I do think, I do agree with the comments that were made before, that we just did something last month to allocate funds or improvements back to the site. So it was the teardrop parcel. So in this, I wanted to honor, I think, the spirit of what the Green Valley Civic Association is asking. I know it's not exactly what they're asking, but there are, in truth, a couple of civic associations that are part of the 4 Mile Run area. And I think it would just be fair that and certainly the 4 Mile Run plan is not fully funded all of the improvements that have been planned for. So I think it would be a good idea that the funds from this transfer of density be allocated to make the improvements to the 4 Mile Run area.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Commissioner Hughes.
I appreciate Commissioner McSweeney's amendment, but I will continue to oppose it because I still believe you need a sending and a receiving site to know who wins, who loses, and what communities are impacted in totality.
All right. Any other discussion on this? All right. All in favor of Commissioner McSweeney's motion, please raise your hand. It's a motion to amend the underlying motion. All right. All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Motion by Commissioner McSweeney to amend the underlying motion is adopted. Any further amendment to Commissioner Giacomini's motion? All right, then the question comes on her motion as amended. All in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that motion carries. So the question comes on, do we have to, no, we're done. Yeah, we're done. All right, I want to thank staff for your work on this. Thanks for your presentation tonight, and thanks for bringing all your colleagues with you. Thanks for being here this evening. Madam Clerk, can you please call the next item?
Item number 2 is bonus density and heights. 2A is ZOA-2019-10, and 2B is a general land use plan map, GP-349-19-1. Jennifer Smith, our planning staff, will be presenting this item this evening.
Welcome, Ms. Smith.
Good evening. Okay, this item includes proposed zoning and general land use plan amendments related to bonus height and bonus density provisions, as well as the definition for low and moderate income housing. These are intended to help the county better achieve all aspects of the comprehensive plan, other important goals and policies, and facilitate greater achievement of affordable housing. Why are we studying this now? With the launch of Housing Arlington earlier this year, this study was prioritized in April. The affordable housing bonus provisions were last reviewed and modified in 2001. They've been available since 1969, and we have identified that this is an appropriate time for another review. Also, in 2015, with the adoption of the Affordable Housing Master Plan, there was a recommendation to evaluate tools in support of home ownership units and to consider expanding income levels for those units. With regards to community facilities, given pressing needs to replace, rebuild, and expand public facilities, this is one of the additional aspects we're looking at. In terms of the bonus density and bonus height provisions in 15.5, broadly these provisions are allowed for site plans. They help us achieve complex goals and priorities where additional incentive is needed beyond the base density allowed by the district standards. These being affordable housing, community facilities, public open spaces, and sustainable building design, also been referred to as LEED or EarthCRAP. There are other uses for bonuses that have been approved on a case-by-case basis. So while it's important to note that these provisions have been in place for decades. More recent planning has occurred in sections of the county, and through those studies, more specific regulations may apply. So these general regulations have little to no application in certain areas of the county, which I'll speak to in a few minutes. At the inception of this study, we identified 5 objectives, drawing your attention to number 1 and the interest in using zoning tools to improve the county's ability to achieve goals for affordable housing and community facilities. And objective number 5, while doing this, to also ensure that densities, heights, and form anticipated by the general land use plan and supporting plans are maintained. The highlights of our proposal really begin with resetting the specific ways bonus can be achieved for affordable housing and community facilities, and by doing that through additional flexibility. Under this approach, bonus caps for affordable housing and community facilities would be eliminated, and this allows for an undefined amount of bonus density to be sized for each project. This approach would prioritize key priorities: affordable housing, community facilities, and sustainable design without the current limitations that are in place today. Bonus density moving forward would be controlled by building heights set forth in the applicable zoning districts, unless more height is specified in adopted plans and policies. Under 1559, bonus for affordable housing is set there, and it can be approved depending on, for projects that are office, residential, hotel, or mixed use. You can see in the table that there's different levels depending on project type, different levels of both density and height, and this is also true for community facilities. So we've considered leveling the options with the goal of avoiding missed opportunities to help realize our county priorities. In addition, in 1559, the list of community facilities is narrower than desired, and so we're looking to broaden this list to provide greater clarity on the type of facilities and spaces that can be considered for bonus. In addition, in section 1557, beyond what is in 1559 specifically for affordable housing and community facilities, 1557 has been also approved for bonus for other priorities such as sustainable design and public open spaces. But it's also been used at times when 1559 has been exhausted to help achieve bonus to address other site-specific objectives. So this has resulted in projects being approved with bonus, yet they could not be earned for additional affordable housing or community facility improvements. We found that the intended use for 1557 was really to allow county board discretion to modify certain dimensional aspects, such as placement or parking, rather than for bonus height, but it has been used to date that way. So we're looking at adjusting that going forward. We feel that with this study that there's an opportunity to meet important county goals and improve the overall organization and clarity of the zoning ordinance. This is a map showing actually areas where we have more specific plans and regulations codified for those areas. So again, mentioning that the bonus density and height provisions reviewed as part of this study are the general provisions that can apply countywide. Again, where site plans may be approved, and the board has approved bonus for many years. However, over time, these bonus provisions have really been reduced as other more specific planning studies have occurred and specific plans and regulations guide development in those areas. So you can see here, such as Sia, Roslyn, Crystal City, the Clarendon area. There are also, it's important to note that some zoning districts have maximum heights, and the board does not have discretion to approve bonus height. In those more recent planning areas, again, there's a more tailored approach to achieving desired height and density, So these provisions are outside of that framework. As part of this study, we looked at a number of alternatives and considered 3 in greater detail. Alternative 1 reflects staff's recommendation. The proposed approach would eliminate bonus density maximum levels for affordable housing and community facilities and would eliminate the bonus height. Therefore, the controlling factor would be the height maximums in applicable zoning district unless there's other plans or policies that allow for additional height. Sorry about that. Alternative 2 considered just leveling the numeric density levels across all project types and bonus purposes. So this would be elevating to a new 25% cap across all project types and for both community facilities and affordable housing. Alternative 2B would be similar to that, except there would be a new maximum level above 25%, but staff did not investigate what specific percentage that might be increased to. Alternative 3 would offer the most flexible approach in that it would eliminate the bonus density using the undefined bonus density levels, but continuing to allow for potential bonus height to be approved. So under this option, the bonus height would be leveled at 6 stories to create parallel between all types of bonuses. If you noted in the table earlier in the slides, today the bonus height for community facilities is set at a 3-story maximum, and under this approach, they would be equalized at up to 6 stories. Well, this exhibit is shown in your staff report, and it's not generating properly here. This additional exhibit here, this was some analysis that staff did to look and compare the different alternatives. Alternative 1, 2, and 3 by comparison are in the top row. And in comparison, reference A in the bottom row show this is for a site plan that was previously approved at 3901 Fairfax Drive, which is at the corner of Fairfax and Quincy. And this shows what the approved site plan footprint might be extruded up with filling that development under these various scenarios, either with the density as articulated with the bonus, say under alternative 2, where there's a flat 25% increase, or with undefined bonus under alternative 1 within the maximum height limit under the CO25 zoning district. Alternative 3 would carry those heights and densities up to 18 stories under the premise of allowing additional 6 stories. Reference A, visual on the bottom row, shows what the densities would be under the general land use plan at a 2.5 FAR. Reference B shows what the approved site plan was here at 9 stories. And then reference C shows what the density is at the office bonus provision under CO25. So you can see here in alternative 1, this shows there is potential for additional density to be earned above what the general land use plan allows for, and that there is space within the building height up to 12 stories. Alternative 2 shows that we would still be limited under the ceiling of 25% bonus. And under that scenario, the approved site plan would not have been able to be approved at that level. We would have had to rely on additional density. And alternative 3, you can see that the combined effective FAR is significantly higher than what the land use plan was calling for, and the heights in this particular case are divergent from what's in some of the surrounding areas. So for a number of reasons, staff feels that alternative 1 best meets the stated objectives. It would allow the board to determine the specific density levels on each project. And unlike 2A and 2B, we feel like that the density would not be competing under a set level. And under alternative 3, the additional density and height through bonus would be above, but more in alignment with the density shown on the GLUP. Some have questioned about why eliminate the bonus density. Again, staff considers there to be sufficient density potential within the respective zoning districts. With bonus height, significant bonus is possible under the GLUP levels, and increasing the density on a site-by-site basis should be carefully considered. In the past, bonus height has not been requested routinely, and only 3 proposals through our research have been approved in the past 2 decades. And as noted, these bonus height provisions really have limited application, given either where zoning is already set at a maximum level or in several areas where there is more specific plan guidance that the bonus heights do not apply. Some have also questioned whether bonus height should be allowed in CO Crystal City. This came up at the board hearing for the request to advertise. Staff included text in our proposal for section 716, which is the CO Crystal City district, to clarify that bonus density and height was not applicable. Since the request to advertise, we've uncovered that similar text was adopted by the county board in 2011 with the CO Crystal City district. However, it was omitted by mistake with the zoning ordinance reformatting process that occurred after 2011. So at this time, staff considers the additional text to be more technical in nature. The proposed text that you have in your staff report for 716. However, more importantly to note that if there were a desire to allow bonus density and height to apply in Crystal City, other sections of that zoning district would need to be amended in order to allow for this. Not just omitting this additional text would allow for the bonus. In crafting the 2010 Crystal City Sector Plan, recommended building heights were a critical element integrally linked with many other aspects of the plan to establish a community vision and establish effective tools to manage and shape the growth. And even though there was request at that time to allow more height, staff recommended and the board adopted a sector plan with clear building height limits based on key planning principles and supporting analyses. And with that, when the Crystal City District was created, that was really based on the planning process that sought to manage overall growth and development potential in Crystal City. It allowed for the greatest building heights focused in areas defined as activity nodes. That was based on transportation systems that were analyzed and future improvements based on the levels of potential growth based on the planned building heights. It accounted for shadow impacts, and it also accounted for FAA feasibility and review. And lastly, for creating a more varied and interesting Crystal City skyline. In summary, the proposed zoning amendment related to bonus would eliminate the maximum limits for affordable housing and community facilities and create more equal opportunities to achieve multiple county priorities. It would eliminate the bonus height as staff finds that sufficient room for additional density exists within the maximum heights for each district. Would clarify the list of eligible community facilities, consolidate bonus density into one section of the zoning ordinance to make it clearer on the set of eligible public facilities for bonus. And there are additional technical changes to provide more clarity on when these provisions are applicable. Related to the bonus density, staff's recommending an amendment, to the GLUP legend and the booklet. And this is to provide further clarification about the use of bonus for those who are looking at the general land use plan. The second piece of this proposed zoning ordinance amendment is related to the low or moderate income definition. And this is a term that's used to define parameters for affordable housing when the bonus provisions are utilized. Currently, the definition sets clear maximum limits for income levels by housing type. And as the Affordable Housing Master Plan recommended, further discussions of missing middle housing are occurring. Staff recommend that the definition be revised to allow the county board greater flexibility in considering the terms for affordable housing when approving bonus density. And we expect to have further discussion around these policies as part of the Housing Arlington initiative, and more specifically, the Affordable Housing Master Plan review. We've presented and met with several groups. Comments in support of the proposed changes have been to remove the bonus density maximums. Those have been expressed. However, several groups have articulated concerns about removing the ability to approve bonus height. So at this time, staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the proposed zoning and GLUP amendments as shown in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith, for your presentation. Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers?
We have 3 speakers. Actually, Mr. Spilsbury was for this item. Are you here, Mrs. Spilsbury?
Yes, please. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is John Spilsbury. I'm co-chair of the Development Committee of the Ashton Heights Civic Association. And I just wanted to speak briefly to the proposed amendments. Our Civic Association had representatives who attended the September 17th joint meeting of the Zoning and Long Range Planning Committees of the Planning Commission, and we've been following this discussion related to revised caps on bonus density and height. And we understand the county's desire to clarify and consolidate the provisions in these regulations while providing equal opportunities to obtain contributions of affordable housing or other critical community facilities for residential, office, commercial, and hotel development, or in exchange for those, or in connection with those. As a general matter, we commend the effort to allow for the consideration of additional density in a balanced manner across the various categories to contribute to public improvements within the height limits set forth in the applicable zoning districts. At the same time, based on feedback from AHCA, Ashton Heights Civic Association members, we do have some concerns that we just wanted to share. And generally, these relate to apprehension expressed by some AHCA members that the lifting of caps on density not lead to approval of maximum density requests without due regard for public concerns about the need for appropriate tapering and preservation of the character of the surrounding neighborhood. Thus, for instance, we'd like to ensure that unlimited bonus density not lead to a shift towards what might be considered excessively massive or boxy style buildings with less variation. And in addition to preserving neighborhood character and variety of architectural features, our members believe it's important that decisions on bonus density give adequate weight to the need to preserve light and air in denser corridors in Arlington. And finally, we would welcome an effort to clarify and potentially codify, if appropriate, minimum standards for tapering building height in new construction projects. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Brian Moll, followed by Carmen Romero.
Welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this evening. My name is Brian Moll, and I'm an Executive Vice President with JBG Smith. We are here this evening because we are concerned about the proposal to eliminate the board's authority to approve bonus height beyond those heights recommended in certain zoning districts or sector plans. We understand the staff concern about the potential for combining uncapped bonus density with uncapped bonus height, but the existing site plan review process should address these concerns. The process mandates significant oversight and review from staff, the community, and the board, which is sufficient to ensure that any additional heights above the zoning district or sector plan are sufficient. Approving these changes sets a troubling precedent, in our opinion. The legislation has the practical effect of codifying the county's land use guidance or policy into the zoning ordinance or law. Every one of the sector and area plans created by the community and adopted by the board have been done so with the understanding that these plans are policy and not law. Converting them into law through these changes is a breach of the agreement that was made with the stakeholders and the community when reviewing and adopting these plans. If parties involved in these planning processes knew that the plans would become law rather than the remain policy as stated, the discussions between the parties would have shifted dramatically. Unilaterally converting policy into law is not good governance. These changes also create a significant practical issue. Many of the county's land use plans have not been revisited for decades. Market conditions and trends can change quickly, creating a risk of land use plans becoming outdated. If no relief valve exists on height, communities and stakeholders will be saddled with plans that carry the weight of law and have no bearing on the contemporary planning and economic realities. The board should always have the discretion to consider developments which do not align perfectly to the existing land use plan guidance. Not only does this flexibility result in superior developments that are better tailored to the individual characteristics of each site, but it can also result in more substantial community benefits, since bonus height and associated density must be earned. Capping height in a way that staff proposes will reduce the provision of enhanced community benefits. In fact, we plan to ask the board to continue studying the height in Crystal City in exchange for extraordinary community benefits, including additional affordable housing above and beyond what is called for under existing bonus mechanisms and significantly increasing new open space. In summary, we support the proposed revisions related to bonus density caps, but believe the provision relating to bonus height requires additional consideration and analysis before they be adopted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wall.
And our last speaker is Carmen Romero.
Good evening, Ms. Romero.
Good evening. On behalf of APA, I want to comment on the proposed changes to the zoning ordinance to modify the bonus density and height provisions of the zoning ordinance and the general land use plan. We applaud the proposal to remove the caps on density, providing in exchange for affordable housing. However, merely adding the density is not sufficient to encourage additional affordable housing if associated building forms cannot accommodate this density. The proposed language would not allow properties in unplanned areas of the county that are currently zoned RA to obtain additional height. And it's unfortunately in these edge areas that are precisely the areas that are most suitable for affordable housing. It's where we can find prices that we can afford to buy as affordable housing developers. We can't compete often in the metro corridors or in Crystal City proper. We just don't have the cash. We can't close fast enough. So the areas that we're looking for are places that contain existing affordable housing, where there is a lot of RA zoning that exists today. The process that APA has used in the past to create density with these kind of sites has been special GLUP studies. However, these are multi-year efforts that drain resources from our organization, from a staff perspective, from a cash perspective, and it's not a practical way for us to address the affordable housing crisis that exists today. It took us 10 years to get Queens Court under construction. I had a 1-year-old, and I was thrilled that we finally got there in April, but that's way too long for us to create the affordable housing that we need in this county. Another example that we're working on today is APA owns a 3.5-acre site at Marbella in the Fort Myer area of Arlington County, right off of Route 50. It's a 3.5-acre parcel, and it's got garden-style apartments. And our plan would be, and there's structural problems and other issues we're trying to deal with, is to demolish some of them to add additional density. It's an RA zone. Well, something like this was a godsend. You know, when Jen Smith kindly even told me this was on the table a month ago, I was thrilled. I'm like, yes, here it is. Here's our chance. But the problem is, in RA 615, we can't go above 70 feet. So for us to be tearing down 3-story buildings to pop up something that's 6 stories isn't really going to be economically feasible. We have to be more creative to be able to find where in a pocket in a 3.5 acre parcel we do some preservation of garden styles, but where we might pop up and with the grade do a 12-story execution near Route 50, if it's appropriate. So I think it's really important, and that's the 3.5 acre parcel. No one has access to that. We got lucky with that one. But for Queens Court, that's 1 acre. We can't afford to just pop up a 5-story building and in a situation where you only have 1 acre. You have to be able to entertain bonus height when it's appropriate. And I think the SPRC process is a fantastic process. You can reject it at that point if what we're proposing is out of sync, but I want to make sure we have the tools. And this is like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to do it.
Thank you, Ms. Romero. Was that the last speaker, Madam Clerk? Okay, were there any commissions here this evening that heard this matter? Okay, and this did not go to transfer. All right, we'll now go to Commissioner Weir for his ZOCO report.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start out by saying that I have nothing to add to the substance that that Ms. Smith has presented or we've heard from the public commenters, and also to thank Ms. Smith and her colleagues for the work that's been done on this so far. I would like to discuss these in 2 different sets, and I think that my identified possible motions reflects that. I'd like to begin by discussing the matters pertaining to bonus height and density, and separately discuss and consider the issue of the definition of low to moderate income. One of these came to the zoning committee, the other one didn't. The sets of issues are discrete. The discussion that's been had is discrete. So I think everyone will agree with that as a plan. The issue of bonus height and density, as Ms. Smith noted, did come to the zoning committee on September 17. I identify in my report some of the public comment that was made in some of the conversations that were brought up, and I've circulated that. I think that the primary matters on bonus height and density for our discussion center around community and property owner expectations. On the one side, this alternative 1 is one effective way of signaling to neighbors that what the outside limits, at least insofar as height, will be, maybe less so for massing. But I think that we did see an example of this in the slides that Ms. Smith presented. On the other hand, at the same time, when it comes to community and property owner expectations, going a bit to one of the comments that we heard, the planning documents that we have, our site plans, our PDSPs, while they do provide some delimitations, they are in a lot of ways intentionally squishy in a way that you don't expect law or ordinances to be squishy. You expect them to draw bright lines. And there's, I think, a tension there between the importance of clarity with respect to ordinances and the importance of general guidelines that can be negotiated with respect to a lot of the way that a lot of our planning documents have been developed, and the expectations about that squishiness that were carried in the public process that underlie them. Another area that I think would be helpful for the commission to discuss are appropriate levels, whether or not it's appropriate to switch from 25% bonus density to no bonus density limit, or whether a different number or a recommendation for further study along the lines of 50% or 75% or something that isn't quite all the way would be appropriate. Here, I'm trying not to telegraph my own opinions with respect to either of these, but simply to encapsulate comments and positions that we've heard. Third and finally is affordable housing, and whether the commission agrees as a policy matter that removing height limits will have the effect that staff believes will have when it comes to encouraging affordable housing construction. So I will make one other point here, and that's just to correct a mistyping on my part. When we come to the motion on this matter, the language of the motion that I'm going to give is starting partway through to recodify those provisions of Articles 7, 9, 12, and 15 of the ACZO pertaining to bonus density and height. And that's just some additional verbiage to make clear that should that be the motion that passes, that to really signal that that motion only pertains to the bonus density and height. It's just, I think, for the purpose of clarity. On the topic of low to moderate income, this is something that it didn't come to the zoning committee, and so there hasn't been a public conversation about it that we have been in our various roles participants to. Nevertheless, I think that it's a very focused amendment, and I think that that it really raises one or two questions, and one of those is it appropriate to grant the board authority, to recommend that the board grant authority to itself to settle upon an open-ended definition of what constitutes low to moderate income? This amendment, as written, would allow the board to conceivably, politically is a different conversation, but would allow the board the authority to say that low to moderate income is 100% of area median income or 120% of area median income. And I don't have a dictionary that can reconcile 120% of area median income with the words low to moderate. But that's what the resolution would allow. That's what the amendment would allow. I also think as a policy matter that if we are going to seriously engage with the undersupply of housing, we have to take every opportunity to force the board to take seriously the fact that we will not solve the undersupply of housing by eliminating barriers to committed affordable units. The CAF stock is not going to be the way that we address undersupply. And so, I would suggest those as two issues for discussion, the latter really being what kind of a position the commission would want to take about that at this time, and maybe the answer is none. But I've been asked to tee up issues for consideration, and so there they are.
Thank you, Commissioner Weir, for giving us a good overview of our discussion and also kind of your thoughts and previewing your motions as well. So as Commissioner Weir suggests, let us please start with his kind of 3 buckets of discussion issues. This is on top of page 3 of his memo. We will also have time for additional questions that don't fall into these subjects, but are there others that people want to suggest for discussion this evening? There are the GLUP amendments, so I do want to call those out if people want to talk about those, just because they're kind of another item before us this evening. Are there other things? Commissioner Siegel.
Could we focus on the RA districts? There's a paragraph in staff report setting out intentions to further study it. I'd like to get some more information.
Excellent. Others? Okay. Commissioner Montelmi.
I don't know whether this would be a clarifying question or whether it should be a topic of discussion, but does this proposal have an impact on the HCDs?
Okay, we can have a discussion of that perhaps and question along those lines. All right. All right, well then let's start with any questions that folks have on the first topic area, which is sort of this kind of predictability topic. So Commissioner Siegel, do you have a question?
I hope this is a question. Let me get it into my question head. Maybe I just do it this way to save time. I was comforted by the referral or the removal of this sort of over policy with regard to Crystal City, Roslyn, where we have plans. We have plans that have been community reviewed 2 years, sometimes 3 years. We have character of the neighborhood. We have intent. We have vision that the community is weighed in on. We talk about tapering. We talk about building form, things like that. I don't find those plans squishy. I do find them subject to interpretation. We saw staff and Planning Commission disagree on interpretation of pedestrian passageways, for example, just to give you an example. So I'm comfortable that the universe of areas of sites in the county we're talking about is smaller. I guess I just put it generally to you, where there are no plans, for example, currently, although I know your intention is to include River House in the PDSP update, currently there's no plan for River House. That's a prime area for increased height. There are other examples, but where there's no plan and also where there are old plans. We have complained about Ballston. Commissioner Schroll has led the charge on that, where we have imperfect plans. Have you thought about that, and what do you think?
Well, we have thought about that, and again, to clarify, what we're talking about here is more recent plans that are not just plans. We have set up a set of regulations to implement those plans. Crystal City, Roslyn, Clarendon, Courthouse Square, RAPS. So we're not just talking about taking policy, and we have a very direct way of now regulating in those areas. If you want to opt into what those plans call for, those plans and the zoning set out how density can be achieved in those areas. But yes, there are other sectors that have older plans that there's been bonus approved in those areas for decades. And we will continue to look at those areas and may apply bonus unless and until some other specific set of regulations may be applicable in that area, like in Crystal City or Roslyn. But until then, these regulations would say you can earn additional density up to the maximum heights in those applicable zoning districts.
But to follow up real quick, so to remove the, for example, 25% cap for affordable housing in one of these planned areas where the plan is old or imperfect or whatever, that would allow a proposal, development proposal for a site plan to have 50% or 75%, right, under the proposal.
That's correct, and it would be controlled by the building height under, again, whatever zoning district
Under
is being
the zoning
proposed.
district.
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes.
So in this map, I guess staff has up, we have form-based code and neighborhood form-based code marked as blue. How would staff interpret a site plan application within that area from a particular development, and would it therefore no longer have the 25% cap?
To be clear, we're showing form-based code to just be clear that these provisions don't apply there.
So
So
I'm
if
inferring
you
from
were-
that response that the site plan application would be able to earn and receive the bonus density above its underlying CO zoning, for example.
So if there were a site plan application in the Columbia Pike area, we would be looking at what zoning either exists or is being requested, and there could be, in theory, a request for additional density in that site plan district.
That would not, that would be a development outside of the neighborhood form-based code or the form-based code.
Correct.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Morton and then Commissioner Weir.
Just quickly, these seem to be the most recent or maybe the most kind of prescriptive plans that you've exempted. I think Clarendon was 2006, right? So like 5 years from now, I mean, is there a sort of general time period, or will you be revising what's exempt as time goes by?
We will continue to look at what is the appropriate zoning as we continue to plan, and look at whether it makes sense to have a set of specific zoning regulations to implement those plans. That's a possibility. I don't have, I can't give you a precise answer on that at the moment. We're studying Lee Highway. We don't even know what the vision is to know what the tool is and to know whether we would limit bonus there or not. I think it's a premature, it's difficult to answer at the moment.
Commissioner Morton, the example you raised, the Clarendon sector plan, has really been invaluable in many ways to guide growth and form in Clarendon. You'll recall that Red Top Cab recently came before the Planning Commission and the County Board. We'll expect some other applications probably next year as well. So again, that sector plan provides important guidance. And again, the zoning ordinance as well links back to the plan. So we're pretty confident that the Clarendon plan will remain a very important guide for applications.
Yeah, I wasn't dissing the Clarendon plan. I live right there, as you know. But just as an example, I know that's sort of the older spectrum of the newer plans, and if there was a, phasing out eventually of some of these, so.
But it's a good example because we think it's stood the test of time in many ways. Now, we could discuss some of the others, but Clarendon, I think, is a good example of a community-based planning process a number of years ago that still is weathered well.
Commissioner Weir.
So I apologize if I've missed this, and if I haven't, I apologize for not having asked it earlier in the process. But the 3 sites where an applicant has sought the maximum height, how many of those are in areas that are covered by one of the planning documents that could conceivably, of the kind that we're talking about? And are any of them in unplanned areas, such as the kind that the APA representative was concerned about?
One site plan was here in Courthouse, the Odyssey site plan. I don't know the number of it, but not too far east from here. Ballston Corridor is the second, and the third one in Ballston, Aaron.
That third one is the 4420 Fairfax Drive project where the west entrance to Boston Metro is located.
So to clarify, staff is not aware of any project coming up in an area that is not covered by a planning document, where the applicant has also sought the maximum allowed height under the districts.
That's correct.
Yes. Commissioner Guerin, and then Commissioner Bagley.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate all the questions you answered for me earlier today. I'm still wrapping my head around all of this, colleagues. I wonder if you can help me think through what this might look like in practice in an area where there's a lot of development that comes in, because in my head, I keep seeing what we saw with the slides at the end of the report. Everything looks rather big and boxy, and I think we've developed a preference for things with more of a variable skyline, with tapering to adjacent neighborhoods. And we know, even with recent GLUPs, we've recognized with the neighborhoods the trade-off between some additional height, giving us the tapering, giving us the open space. It feels like, I may be misunderstanding this, but this might preclude that. We might get some buildings that are really tall and most that kind of adhere to what we expected for in height.
I'll start on this, and others may want to jump in. Those models were really just shown to understand what the maximum envelope would be. and to see how far and above the general land use plan designations, how much density could be achieved there. But we would still expect every site plan to be reviewed just as staff does today and through a community process to determine what is the appropriate form of development. And not only appropriate form, but the appropriate level of density. So I think that there would be, while those maximums would be in there and someone could ask to have just a bigger mass as what was shown there, we would still review the proposal and think about heights and transitions.
Go ahead, Commissioner. Or, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Duffy.
Just to build on Jen's response and back to how we apply the sector plans. And the Ballston sector plan, is probably our oldest, dating back to 1980. But there are some very substantial policy guidance there in terms of tapering and stepping back height, form, and massing and density from the core Ballston, the Coordinated Redevelopment District, back to the neighborhoods. And over many years, the Planning Commission and the County Board staff have applied that basic policy dealing with tapering. And so even though we have a sector plan that is been with us for many years, it still has basic guidance that we can use to influence architecture and building form and so forth. So another example of how the sector plans inform our site plan applications.
Thank you. I feel like I'm still not fully understanding this because I can anticipate developers, certainly affordable housing developers who need to maximize the site that they can use, and even others who want to take advantage of our views, wanting to max out. And if they can, they'll max out in a boxy shape, whereas I know recently we've looked at things where we've said, how about a little more height here, a little less height here, so it's more interesting and provides more of a taper. And as you say, we do this in the site plan process, but it feels like maybe we wouldn't be able to do this in the site plan process if the height were fixed, rather than us saying, you can go a little taller here. What am I missing?
I would just remind the commission that just because there's an allowance to earn up to densities and heights, there's no guarantee that you have the ability to achieve that. And those are stated as maximums, and every project is evaluated to determine its ability to achieve that by way of mitigating its impact and fitting in within, its contextual surroundings. And I think that's why it's so important when you look at some of the models that Jim put in the staff report, because those are showing some hypothetical scenarios where just because, what would have happened if you could have gotten 6 extra stories, or even what could you have done with some additional density. But in all those examples, I think we achieved a very successful building form that achieved certain just general planning principles, as Mr. Duffy mentioned, such as what was the case with the hotel across the street, where we got some good tapering going back into the Lion Village neighborhood. When we look at the 3901 Fairfax Drive project, additional density was achieved, but they still had to meet the plan goals and provide a very active open space. Same thing at Marymount. So every time we're still looking at that, and I don't think we've ever just said, because you have the ability to achieve that height and that density, just plop it down there and just see what happens. There's a shaping exercise that goes into it. And so I think we have plenty of other relevant policies that help us get to a more positive outcome.
So yes, I'm going to go Commissioner Bagley, Commissioner Giacomini, and then Commissioner McSweeney. Go ahead. You got to press it kind of hard.
Maybe that one doesn't work.
You got it.
Is it on? Okay. Along the lines of Commissioner Guerin, I'm also struggling with some of this. Having sat on that side of this process for more times than this side, what would the SPRC process be like? Because what you've just said, it seems like it's going to be the same, but if I'm sitting out on that side and you've got a civic association there, you've got Ms. Romero over there, what am I going to, if I'm John Q. Public or Jane Q. Public, what am I going to see different in an SPRC process? Because even the SPRC process now when you're dealing with neighbors, it's not exactly one that they understand completely to begin with. And especially in some of the areas where we've had more development, and they're sort of getting used to the process or thinking that they're kind of figuring it out. What are they going to see that's different? What are the pros and cons that would be, if this changes, what would that look like? Thank you.
I don't think it changes the way that we look at site plans at all, because what we're doing is still the same. But an applicant has to come to the table and request that additional density. There's nothing within these ordinance amendments which is saying you have to apply that to your site plan project. What we're doing is we're just trying to make some structural changes to revise the way in which that is worded to open up some additional possibilities for how that density is achieved. And so in the context of how we would view it in an SPRC project, we would still evaluate the density, and we'd evaluate the height, and we'd evaluate it for its compliance with adopted plans and policies. And I think that's why it's so important that there is some language that's being proposed, which does tie the achievement of that height and that density back to our adopted plans and policies. So from the citizens' perspective, I would hope that this is actually helping to further support and bolster those plans and policies, so that we're not trying to allow for, or at least as it's proposed by staff, not allow those heights to exceed what those adopted plans say. So from a height perspective, that's one thing. How you fill it, that's something that we would be evaluating, whether that's at the zoning maximum or it's going X% over that.
Commissioner Giacomini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, have been trying to think about this as a practical matter with SPRC, and it was nice this evening to hear some of our development community praise the SPRC process. Not something we hear all the time, that they have great confidence in it. For me, and maybe this is more of a statement than a question, and but staff could correct me if I'm maybe not seeing this right, that should we take off should we make it unlimited density and unlimited height? And we are told the SPRC process is still there in case the height or density might not be right. I would say actually it's very hard in SPRCs, frankly, for us to really make big changes. And I think staff could bear this out, and maybe my fellow commissioners can too, that should a building come in and ask for additional height of 8 stories or 6 stories or whatever for affordable housing, and they've done their pro forma such that maybe we could have gotten affordable housing too, but they've priced in the extra building, but they've also priced in, gee, I can get a bigger building. And I'm not really sure how much more affordable housing it would have gotten us. I don't have it fully formed in my head, but we have a sector plan that says the expectation is that the heights would be what the zoning is. Or perhaps in some areas we've actually taken the step of shaping it, saying there is a particular transition here to open space that we want to be sensitive to, so it shouldn't exceed X stories. And what comes into us exceeds it greatly. So then in SPR, and plus the applicant has put in the time, they spent gazillion dollars on the drawings, they're very far down the road. And here we are at SPRC trying to push back on this for very good reasons, for stated reasons in a sector plan that gave expectations to the community. And I don't see it happening. I am much more comfortable with the notion of unlimited density than I am of unlimited height, because there is at least some envelope into which someone can decide how much to do it. Now, I have heard from some residential developers it's difficult. We have product that works well. And to me, that might just be saying, we have a way of designing our buildings that is pretty standard and we know it works, and this is what people rent. Well, I don't think you can say that nobody would rent something else that you might figure out in order to max out your density. Just because you think you have to have 2 bedrooms and then 3 and then this and that, I don't think that you can't fix that or change it if you would get more density. But the height just seems fraught to me. It means that not only does the community not know what they might get, frankly, other developers don't know what the developer next to them might get. And then you start this race to the top. I'm not sure that that's what we want to do. So I am supportive of what staff has put before us. Now, I completely understand Commissioner Guerin's thought, and we hear from Ashton Heights, is does making the density make a boxy building, right? Because in stepping back, if I squared it off, I could fit all my density in there. Well, the fact of the matter is, though, allowing more height and sculpting, we might not get that anyway. Again, it goes back to what the developer brings us at SPRC, and we sit there and we try to say this doesn't match a plan, this doesn't do this, without being very prescriptive in a plan and saying, thou shalt have a step back of 10 feet for 11 at the third floor and the rest of it, and trying to prescriptively, which we have in CO Roslyn and Crystal City, right, Mr. Jeffrey? We have bulk plain angle, we do this. Even then, we know when we get to the SPRC table, we have people who have changed that on us. So maybe I'm even arguing against myself, but I am concerned allowing greater height because I do not feel assured that would get us a better sculpted building. I think it could just result in something in a bigger mass. So I'm more comfortable with allowing more units or more office space, or however they want to think of it, in what is prescribed by the height.
Mr. Chairman, just to thank you, Commissioner Giacomini. In Jen's presentation this evening, she started with 5 objectives. And before the county staff began to consider alternatives, we decided that those objectives were extremely important. And I think Planning Commissioner Giacomini touched on parts of those in her statement. Again, I'd urge you to go back and look at those objectives, because that was the measuring rod, if you will, that we put up as we looked at a wide range of options. And again, consistency with the comp plan, with our adopted sector area plans, staying as close and true to the general land use plan as we could, were fundamental objectives that we laid out. And staff believes the alternative that we have before you will be consistent and ensure consistency with those.
Okay. All right, so Commissioner Guerin had a quick follow-up. Come over here to Commissioner McSweeney, and we'll kind of come back around. I also have a comment as well, so.
Okay, so my follow-up goes with capping the heights. I'm concerned is at odds with our increasing land values in the county. And while that's not going to be as big an issue for our market rate developers, I can see this being a huge issue for our nonprofit developers. And if one of our goals here is to provide more affordable housing, and we're talking about family-style units, and we've already subsidized these to a very high degree, I'm not squaring this with this proposal.
I don't know if it would be helpful to go back and look at the exhibits further, but I think the exhibits show that there are opportunities to earn additional density, being for affordable housing as well, and that we've got space to do that within the heights that we see these proposals would come in under. And it would be doing it in a way that we still think it would be appropriate and suitable for where those site plans are going to occur.
You know, just, Commissioner Guerin, just to add to this, and I don't think this is the agenda item to wade in more detail about housing conservation district, although the commissioners raised that as a question, or what we're doing with missing middle. And we recognize that density is going to be a key, and building mass and form in a number of these areas that are outside of our metro transit corridors, whether they're on the edges or in other major corridors in the county, that is something we're going to have to address. And in some part, I think as the staff report indicated, probably a bit beyond the scope of where we are tonight. But we don't disagree that there are the potential for additional height to support affordable housing goals or other county objectives is something we're going to have to look at. But I think there's more to come. It's complex, and we're trying to deal with this first piece of it with this revision.
Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. So the edge areas were one of. Sorry. So the edge areas were were part of my questions too. Part of my question too. So it sounds like what you're saying is you're going to be dealing with them in the future HCD, and you chose not to deal with them here right now.
We have, but we've thought a lot about them, and as many of the commissioners know who have worked on updates to our 5-year updates to our comp plan and general land use plan, this has been an issue that we know we will have to deal with ultimately, whether it's along the edges of the metro corridors or along other major routes that have non-metro transit service and so on. So yes, Commissioner Sweeney, this is definitely an area that Housing Arlington, Missing Middle, and the HCDs are going to need to address.
So I had a second question, and that was to really talk about what I think our Ashton Heights neighbor here was talking about. The areas that actually aren't covered by major plans. There are several that come up against our neighborhoods or are across the street from our neighborhoods. So I think when we have plans, we are very specific about, we try to be at least, about tapering and neighborhood banners and so on. So I think just to help the neighborhoods feel a little bit better about this, what kind of assurances can we give neighborhoods that even if there's an area that not under an existing plan that talks about tapering, how will that tapering occur? How will we achieve that?
Well, again, I mean, I think that those are some guiding principles that we apply throughout. We would also look to the general land use plan. We look at the context of all site plans to know what the built form is around it. And maximum heights and transitions are always in our mind. And I think that was something that we looked at most recently. I'm thinking of the Trenton Street project that was off of the metro corridors, and we had to look at, well, what are the site conditions around, and thinking about what would be the appropriate form and transitions as that site plan proposal went forward.
Commissioners Ware and then Commissioner Siegel.
So I characterized some of our site plans as squishy in my opening comments. And I want to clarify something especially for people who are, colleagues who are looking at this and thinking, well, how does this not just get us to parcel-sized shoeboxes everywhere? As staff has pointed out, most of our, when I said that, I was trying to characterize the different sides of the comments that we've gotten, right? The truth is, most of our site plans and planning documents, especially the more recent ones, are not squishy on a lot of things. And some of those things are things like setbacks and form. And I think that, as staff has pointed out, the fact that the ZO allows a certain density to be earned doesn't mean that density no longer has to go through the site plan review process. And I think, Commissioner Acamini, you were talking about this a moment ago. There's a whole lot of politics that an applicant has to get through with or without unlimited density under these proposed amendments. And those politics, the only thing that is changed is that a maximum density threshold that the parcel may or may not have ever allowed to be earned under the current language is going to be is going to no longer be there, right? So a site that may have only been able to earn 20% bonus density will still only be able to earn 20% bonus density. The fact that the outside limit is gone, I think in a lot of our cases is going to have very little impact on most of the conversations that we have, except for those sites that are likely to become viable because of these proposed amendments. But on the other side, I think what we've heard, except for some concern from developers and APA especially, is that notwithstanding what we've heard from them, I am not persuaded that there are any hypothetical cases on the height side of that conversation, right? There aren't any. It's more likely that a development is going to become viable because of the density side of these proposed changes than it is that a development would cease to become viable because of the changes on the height side of these proposed amendments. If that, I hope I've made myself clear there.
Commissioner Siegel.
So I wanted to focus in a minute on attachment 3, what you've called the bonus density analysis. But before we do that, I have a question about that. I wanted to support what Commissioner Giacomini focused on, which was, I think, something that some of us who've done this for a couple of years have examples that we can point to, examples of some frustration with the kind of pre-scoping of the issues that are brought before us at SPRC. And that sometimes at the end of the SPRC, we regret that somehow we couldn't get at that issue prior to the SPRC or at the beginning of the SPRC. So I'm sympathetic with that. In the case before us regarding the elimination of the heights and density caps, in very limited cases, I think, is what I'm hearing. But nonetheless, there will be some. My thinking is there's an agenda item in the SPRC which calls for an evaluation of whether a proposal is consistent with the guiding planning documents. Very often, in my experience, the discussion under that agenda item can be extremely pro forma. I know that a lot of staff time has gone into looking at those issues and making a final determination. And what we get at SPRC is often just the final bottom line. Not always, but very often. I'm sort of thinking of a motion that might, back up. I think what a lot of the concern here that you're hearing is that the public often doesn't follow the lengthy process that occurs, discussion between staff and an applicant when an application is made. And there are lots of decisions that are made in that process, from preliminary to final. We don't get to see that. In certain cases, I think we need to see more. The public needs to see more. And this may be one of those cases. So my question about the bonus density analysis, which evokes what we see in CLUP studies, which I'm not recommending here because they take very long, can the bonus density analysis perhaps include some massing that suggests tapering, that shows a couple of different ways the density could be masked, for example?
So again, I just want to remind you that, remember, the staff recommendation is to not alter height. The staff recommendation is to keep the heights as they are related to the adopted plans and policies. We're really just talking about
Or the underlying zoning?
underlying zoning or an adopted plan or policy that says for a specific reason you can go higher. Like in Clarendon, you can go up to 128 feet on certain sites through the achievement of community facilities. So where we have specific guidance like that, then you could exceed that zoning district. But in terms of the work that staff does, you're right. We do a significant amount of evaluation and analysis well in advance of something that comes before SPRC. And I would just remind you that since we started issuing the conceptual site plan memos, those are serving as the basis for the commencement of the SPRC review. And so I think that's one gateway into staff's analysis or their thought process. I would just remind you of the Harris Teeter project that's coming before this commission on Wednesday. If you go back over the last 3 years and you look at the evolution of that project, beginning with their conceptual site plan, it has substantially changed, and I mean dramatically, from a point where that initially came in and it had no resemblance of what the North Quincy Street Plan Addendum recommended for the site to a level where it is today, where it has the resounding staff support for the evolution. So you can go back and you can track that. Now, to what degree you want to make that part of the discussion as part of the SPRC, I would welcome that. I think staff would be more than happy to opine on how they got to that point. Even, as you're aware, at the SPRC, staff does not express an opinion, but we would be happy to share with you our analysis of, just what are we looking at to at least understand how that density as being proposed either does or does not fit within the context of the adopted planner policy, at least from our perspective and at that point in time.
But they didn't answer the question. Thank you for that. I appreciate that response as a general matter. But in terms of this bonus density analysis, to give some greater comfort and to add the important information to discussion, could you create some of these analyses?
Sure. Well, we can
and taper, for example.
Well, again, I mean, taper has a lot of interpretations. And, what are we tapering towards? As Mr. Duffy said, I think it's just a general practice that we have is that if you have a commercial or a mixed-use project and it is adjacent to a low-density or a residential project, just good planning practice, good urban form says you want to taper that back. But, for example, I always like to talk about the Marymount project. What was really necessary from a tapering perspective? We were looking at commercial office buildings next to like buildings. So the analysis wasn't so much how am I tapering back towards, a lower density use, but more so how is that tapering that height relating to its adjacent buildings? Those are the type of things that we can explain, or we can give you that level of the analysis as we come forward in the SPRC. But that level of density, I think, is always part of the proposal. It's always part of the discussion. To what degree you want to highlight that, for example, to say, they could have earned up to 100,000 square feet within, the density limit, but they're asking for 125%. How is that extra, or excuse me, 125,000, how is that extra 25% being achieved? You can move that up. We can start that discussion wherever you want.
One quick, I'm only suggesting that work be somehow externalized in terms of information for the public during the SPRC. That's really what my focus has been reading through this document.
Chair's prerogative, I'm going to ask a question, and then we'll come down the line and kind of circle back. I have a question for staff. Attachment 1A, page 9 of attachment 1A. You're proposing to eliminate bonus density caps, but you haven't proposed any adjustment for the percentage of ADUs in the different categories. And I'm wondering, I know that the overall density that you would be calculating would go up, but I'm wondering, for example, the kind of 5% of GFA above 1.0 FAR for on-site units and the 7.5. Can staff speak to its analysis of whether it did or didn't consider adjusting these and why or why not.
So for clarification, under 1558, section 1558 of the zoning, that's the affordable housing ordinance that applies between a 1.0 FAR up to the site plan base. And then, and that's got a specific metric for either on-site units or off-site or cash contributions. And then under 1559, that's all bonus where it is negotiated. So there's not a numeric a level of precision that's applied to every site plan application.
Yeah. So I guess I'm just wondering, there was sort of an option here to have expanded this to have said you're going to go to 7.5% for the standard. Could you have not done that, or you couldn't have increased it here?
That's through the enabling legislation, what's codified in 1558. So we would really have to revisit that at the state level to really change what's in 1558.
Okay.
But it's a very good question, and again, as Ms. Smith indicated in her presentation, those are the type of areas when we update the Affordable Housing Master Plan, its recommendations, that I think we'll touch on as well.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Hughes, and then we'll come back down this way.
Sort of a more broad question since staff did this study, and I apologize for missing the ZOCO meeting. The imbalanced incentives on number 2 for the guiding principles for staff. So it's staff belief, but by changing this ordinance, we will somehow encourage our development community to come forward with bonus density requests for affordable housing? Is that what I'm understanding in that statement?
Not necessarily. I think the importance from a staff perspective is that it doesn't prioritize one mechanism or mode of achieving that density over the other. We have had situations in the past where a project has not been able to achieve certain goals because due to the imbalance, they weren't able to give us contributions towards affordable housing. We recently dealt with this on the Best Western site plan down on Route 50 because it was an apartment and a hotel project. They weren't able to achieve their density through one mechanism. Hence, we had an off-site contribution for Fort Myer Heights Park. I think in that case, there was some, and it was a legitimate question and concern, and I believe this commission might have even raised it. Wouldn't it have been nice if we could have gotten a larger contribution towards affordable housing? And so, the point here is that whenever we look at these additional density categories or proposals, an applicant doesn't come forward and say, this is how I'm going to earn it. And I think that's why it's so important to us that it opens up the possibilities. And I know we're talking a lot about affordable housing, but it's really important, don't lose sight of the recommended revision to the language regarding community facilities because it is so narrow right now. We also lose opportunities, or we feel we lose opportunities to achieve some of those goals as well. So this really just gives us the opportunity to have that discussion with the developer and say, how can that density be earned? Is there a way to, if we want, or if the board wants to prioritize one thing over the other, we have that ability, or we can balance it out. And you've seen us do that in some of the more specific site plans, most recently with the Elcor project last month. But think about if we were doing that and it was outside of a planned area like in Crystal City, how would we achieve those additional goals? And I see us having that opportunity to do so with the expanded definitions as proposed.
All right, Commissioner Lantelmi, Commissioner Morton, and then I do want to move on to some of the other things that people had mentioned.
A couple of sort of response points. Commissioner Weir mentioned about, well, where's it a concern? I think the concern, for example, that APA raised is that it's the projects that don't even walk in the door because it isn't even considered because it becomes impossible under this proposal. And that's a concern because those are units that we could have had that will never even be considered. As far as design, I think Commissioner Guerin raises a good point about we get lots of boxes. That, I think, happened on Washington Kirkwood. That's outside of its sector plan. Special glove study had height limits on it, and that's a box. There's no setback. There's some oddities there, but it's a box. it's nice, but it's a box. And I think we're going to be seeing more of those based on this. I think we're almost too concerned about, too afraid of height. Recently, Fairfax approved in Tyson's a well over 600-foot building, a complex, one 600, another one over 400, with the specific intent of having the tops be more interesting. And that's a design, they broke through their purported height limit there in order to make a more interesting design, and went substantially above that. When we were looking right here at some of those scenarios for the Marymount, the one which had 18 and 22 stories, frankly, on that site, it could have supported it. It wouldn't have been really a violation of what we're seeing there now. It would have been bigger, but I don't think it would really affect the feel for that area very much. I think Boston could support a lot more height in a lot more places, and we could have maybe gotten a lot more affordable housing out of that site by allowing it to go up those extra stories. That being said, I absolutely understand why in other districts, the height really is a problem. In an R6, if we wanted to do missing middle, we're not going to want to have a missing middle that's going to go twice the height of everything else there necessarily. So I'm really torn here. You're hearing my struggling of how to understand the implications of this when it's almost a one-size-fits-all, and zoning and our neighborhoods, our county is site-specific, and there are areas that really can support a lot more height and others that can't, and this is sort of just cutting it right off. I guess that's sort of my concern.
Thank you. Commissioner Morton.
Thank you. In general, I theoretically support the removal of limits on bonus density and height. I'm in agreement with some of the comments expressed previously. A lot of times people feel height, but if there's sufficient attention to ground level detail and shadows, whether it's casting shadows on an important public space, on sculpting. But I associate myself with Commissioner Giacomini, Siegel, McSweeney, Guerin, who, we get projects that come to SPRC, which, we feel from the beginning aren't really complying. And I kind of feel like if there could be don't even think about coming in the door until we've done some kind of analysis. And I don't know, how to implement that, but, some kind of very explicit analysis. If you're getting the bonus density, show us a graphic of how does it change the shadows, how does it change the massing? Because we end up negotiating something back to a position that we're not always satisfied with, like the Washington and Kirkwood project. I don't know, again, if there's a way of, I sort of like Commissioner Siegel's idea of really articulating up front how you got to that point. Clearly you feel like it's ready, but we sometimes are faced with, it just doesn't seem to comply, and then we're whittling it back, but it doesn't really feel like it's, complying even at the end, even though there's a lot of compromise. So I'm in general supportive of removing limits, but I'm uncomfortable with just the SPRC process as the way to, make sure that everything's going forward appropriately.
Mr. Duffy?
Commissioner Morton, as you know, is well known, and the Planning Commission well known, the Site Plan Review Committee is your process. And the recently staff worked with the commission, particularly Commissioner Siegel, on the Citizens Guide to the SPRC process. And as part of that, we identified that there were a number of parts of that still required further work. And all of you were meeting, I think, as sort of an ad hoc committee to sort of think about some aspects of that. So I think the commission can certainly recommend to staff or the county board that we should look at the agenda and so forth to try to address some of the points you've raised.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Let's move on to questions that people have about HCDs. Do you have something else, Commissioner Steinberger?
Really quick. sorry. I'm hearing the struggle from the other commissioners here, and I have to be honest that I'm still struggling as well. I'm not clear to at this point, and I honestly don't know how I'm going to vote on this, that a strong case has been made for this kind of bifurcation of density and height that is sort of being addressed in this proposal. Clearly, there is an indicated bifurcation here. I'm just still not understanding thoroughly why that staff's recommendation. And I feel like we're kind of punting and saying that SPRC is still going to be able to, manage the process. I think there's going to be implications of this change that are greater than what is actually being explained and addressed here, and sort of saying, no, nothing's going to change isn't really getting me to where we want to get to. Thank you.
So I want staff to answer, but I want to, Commissioner Steinberger, there already are some zoning districts that cap height but allow the applicant to achieve a bonus density up to that max height, like RC. And so this already exists today in some of our zoning districts. And Ms. Smith did have a slide up that kind of indicated some of those other zoning districts. But does staff want to further respond to?
Yes. I think staff recognizes the importance of using the zoning tool, bonus tool, to help achieve some of these community benefits, affordable housing and community facilities being two of those, where we really need some additional incentives to realize those. But I think when you start to apply bonus height, and we're talking about up to 6 additional stories, you are significantly adding an amount of density that's far and above what the land use plan calls for. And then you really have no understanding of what the density is on our land use vision. So I think from staff's perspective, if the community is interested in increasing density and in heights in certain areas, we should look at that through a planning process, not just on a case by case. It should be a precursor to a site plan application.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Giacomini, and then, sorry.
Quick question.
Well, I'm going to Commissioner Giacomini, and I'll come to you, Commissioner Siegel. And then I want to keep moving. Yes.
So just following on what Ms. Smith had said, and it suddenly dawned on me that in her expression of if you suddenly allow both additional heights and densities, all of a sudden it's 6 stories here, and we're getting much more than we had anticipated in plans. And our plans just aren't about the buildings. Our plans are also about the transportation infrastructure, about the water and sewers, which is another element of the comp plan, about everything that an area can hold. And when we have looked at our plans like CO Roslyn, the Roslyn sector plan, Crystal City sector plan, all of them, but particularly as we've gotten, I hate to say more sophisticated, but we have gotten more sophisticated in how we look at our sector plans. It's a whole system. So when you take one thing and you make it a variable, you have no idea how that's going to accumulate and affect the transportation network. Or our planned streets, and for instance, the transportation plan that goes along with the Roslyn sector plan, would that even be sufficient anymore if all of a sudden we had no clue how much density or height we were going to have? I would be a little worried about that. Now, I only use Roslyn as an example because that's the first one I can think of that has a specific transportation plan that attaches to it. But our other sector plans do as well, because of our master transportation plan and how we've laid out the vision and the capacities for those roads. So I leave that there.
Commissioner Siegel, and then I want to move on to some of the other.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll.
I do want to get to the other half of this, which is the low and moderate income discussion within the next 10 minutes.
So I love the idea of a broader look at some of these areas that I'm concerned about that don't have good plans or what I consider to be robust plans. Is staff considering that? because what you mentioned, Ms. Smith, just before Commissioner Giacomini's question, because there you could identify specific sites, perhaps talk about cost reductions in terms of planning, sort of what form-based code does, to invite certain developers to develop affordable housing developers, et cetera. It almost feels like while this exercise I think is a valuable one, it almost feels to me like putting the cart before the horse, or it's sort of incomplete and has left people with a lot of questions. So the question is staff considering such a comprehensive look at areas that might be more appropriate for more robust affordable housing?
Well, first of all, I would remind the commission that we're undertaking a study of Lee Highway. We're getting ready to revisit the Pentagon City area. And other areas may become inserted into our work plan. But we are also looking at general land use plan studies. We're looking at the Shirlington area, and we've got 2 other general land use plan studies that are queued up to happen after that one. So there's a number of ways where we will be looking at what is the density and heights in areas, and the outcome of those studies may say heights within or less than the zoning are appropriate, or they may conversely say heights in addition to what the zoning would be in place. And the board, under these provisions, the board would have the ability to approve those additional heights if those policies are in place. The other thing, maybe to just turn a little bit to the HCD, the Housing Conservation District, that's an area where we're outside of our planned areas. And we have a policy in place where we're trying to conserve and preserve affordable housing, but also diversify housing in those areas. Yes, there are bonus provisions in the zoning ordinance today for the RA districts that allow by site plan to get a little bump of density at 25%. And there's some additional height in exchange for that. And then there is this 6 extra stories that's out there. People haven't been asking for that. But we're also trying to see what we can do under the HCD. Again, it's not everywhere that RA zoning exists. It's in these 12 areas. But we're trying to look at what we can offer for affordable housing, and that might, what we've said thus far, wouldn't even be the site plan process. We're looking to try and incentivize that through a use permit tool. Mm-hmm. So at the moment, it's something that we want to kind of put a pin in it and come back and continue to look at what the zoning provisions are for these RA districts in the context of what we're doing with HCD. We don't want to create dueling tools. Mm-hmm. And so we want to be able to finish some of our analysis on HCD. We want to be able to go back and look at what the history a little bit more in depth has been for the RA districts, because there's some different things going in there, and we want to kind of understand that a little bit further. And so that's something that we intend to do as a follow-on to this process.
Excellent. Well, I think Ms. Smith, with that great answer, you covered some other topics that we were going to cover, which were RA and also HCD. So thank you for that. And it's good to hear that staff's going to do that. Like the last section here was there are some GLUP amendments as part of this. So if there are any, they seem to be rather straightforward GLUP amendments to kind of further codify this. But are there any questions about those, Commissioner Hughes? No, we're doing that. Yeah, this is just the last piece on this. Okay. All right. Hearing none, we're going to move. Commissioner Hughes, you can get the first question on low and moderate income.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll. Sorry. I just want to have staff opine for a moment. Is this related to the income averaging that goes on within the VHDA process? Is that what the goal of with this language? That's the case for those commissioners who may not be aware. That's where the average of the whole site is still less than 60%, and it's achieved through contribution of units at 50, 40, 30% AMI, and some above up to 80% AMI. that income averaged to 60% AMI for the whole building. But I'm guessing from staff's response, that's not the goal here.
No, and it doesn't interfere or conflict with that VHDA process, to my knowledge. And we worked very closely with the housing staff on this. What it does do is recognize that the county's had a longstanding goal to provide housing units for those households earning 60% or less of AMI, low income, and 80% of AMI for moderate income. But to provide the opportunity, as Aaron said it, an opportunity for the board to consider projects that could have a higher AMI that we need to address. Starts to get to the missing middle issue, and I think there'll be more clarification on this as we get into parts of Housing Arlington and updates of the Affordable Housing Master Plan. But again, the point Aaron made was, this is the time and this is the opportunity, at least provide that opening for the county board to attempt to capture affordable housing at all levels.
Well, I'm very excited to see this as someone who was a housing coordinator before in another very high-cost area. We sometimes used 80 to 120% of area median income for homeownership opportunities, depending on the neighborhood and what the other goals were. If we were trying to stabilize the community or provide homeownership opportunities to folks who are first-time homebuyers or something similar. So I think this is a really good step for our community.
Thank you, Commissioner Guerin. Others, Commissioner Weir.
I'm advised that some of our peer jurisdictions also use 120%, and so I'm just going to mention that when it comes to motions, instead of using 100% as the maximum, when we get to it, I intend to use 120, having not previously known that about our peer jurisdictions.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner Weir. Other folks that want to be heard on this or ask a question of staff? Okay. Well, with that, are there any other topics that people wanted to cover with this before we move to motions? Okay. Commissioner Weir. Make a motion.
My comment notwithstanding the fact that I can't reconcile.
Commissioner Hughes.
I apologize. So I want to make sure I understand correctly from staff. Am I to understand that absent a revision to the Affordable Housing Master Plan, our adoption of the zoning ordinance would enable the county board to only rely on the guidance previously adopted in the Affordable Housing Master Plan with respect to identifying the opportunities for providing bonus density for other income levels?
I would really like to defer to our housing staff. Unfortunately, they're not here. But there's guidance in the Affordable Housing Master Plan that deals with renters and home ownership. And we've talked a lot about that and whether to suggest that it's 85%, 90%. That's really going to require some further study, again, as part of the Housing Master Plan update and some of the other work that we're now doing as part of Housing Arlington. But at least this will provide the board with the opportunity to capture additional housing types and diversity, which I think everyone is supportive of.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Mr. Duffy. Commissioner Weir.
Well, let's start with bonus height and density. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the County Board adopt the attached ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify those provisions of Articles 7, 9, 12, and 15 of the Arlington County Zoning Ordinance pertaining to bonus density and height, as shown in Attachment 1A, and the attached resolution to amend the General Land Use Plan map and booklet, as shown in Attachment 2.
Is there a second? I'll second. Seconded by Commissioner Siegel. Any discussion or amendment? Commissioner McSweeney, and then.
My only question was Commissioner Weir left out Article 18, and he did that on purpose? Or?
Yes, Article 18 deals with low and moderate income, and I wanted that to be dealt with separately.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Siegel.
I'm going to support this amendment, this motion. I had been working on in my mind a motion. Our motions take the form of recommendations to the county board, but Mr. Duffy reminds all of us that the SPRC process is our process. And we don't have to move forward with SPRC if we haven't gotten all the information that we feel we need to present to the committee, including the public members of the committee from the neighborhoods. We don't have to move forward until we get that information. So this is just, I'm taking this occasion to remind everybody of that, and that in this case, if there is a concern with a site plan where maybe the plan is not robust enough in our view, maybe there is no plan, and we're concerned about this provision, the elimination of caps, if the underlying zoning doesn't provide that comfort, then we would be asking staff for a bonus density analysis or some analysis under that heading of does it comply with a plan. And I just want to remind everybody that we are in a position to ask that. This isn't something we can ask the county board to do. This is something that we need to do. So I just wanted to, I'm not going to make the amended motion that I had in mind because I really do think it's up to us to do this and to have a robust discussion.
Yes, and I think that discussion is probably something that can bring up perhaps in our other working group about what, how our site plan process might evolve. But yes, I don't think it's necessarily as germane necessarily for our discussion this evening. Mr. Duffy?
Staff looks forward to working in partnership with you on that.
Thank you. Any other discussion amendment? All right, then the question comes on the motion by Commissioner Weir. All in favor? All opposed? Commissioner Bagley, any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Commissioner Weir. Commissioner Weir?
So while I still have difficulty with the idea that 120% of area median household income would be considered low income, I do appreciate that that's the decision that our peer jurisdictions have made. And I appreciate Commissioner Guerin's point. And I'm just saying that while I flip through my paper to find the language. So the motion then is that the Planning Commission, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the County Board adopt the provisions in the attached ordinance that would amend, reenact, and recodify Article 18 of the Arlington County Zoning Ordinance as shown in Attachment 1A, subject to the inclusion of additional language that proscribes any definition of low or moderate income that would exceed 120% of median household income.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Guerin. I think there's been a fair amount of discussion on this. Is there any amendment or further discussion? Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll. Commissioner Ware, I'm going to be unable to support the motion this evening. For me, at this point, absent an affordable housing master plan revision or the actual study completion of the missing middle, I'm not in a position where I believe it's for this community and the board to move forward with redefining, for lack of a better way of saying it, what is low and moderate income within our goals. We've had a longstanding precedence of the 60% AMI at the 120, or at the for renters, and the 80% for the home ownership levels. And the AHP also did mention the home ownership opportunities to be explored between the 80 and 120%. It didn't say to go ahead and do it. It said to study it. And we need to do that study first before we begin to give out bonus density for yet unrealized opportunities for this. Without that providing guidance for how and where we should allocate and achieve those goals, I can't support the motion tonight to redefine the low and moderate income levels.
Any further discussion? All right. All in favor of Commissioner Weir's motion, please raise your hand. All opposed? That's five. So the motion carries. 1, 2, 3, yeah. Okay. Any further amendment? All right. I do want to thank staff for their work on this and for being with us to answer all our questions. With that, the commission stands in recess until Wednesday.